Ethan Cross slammed his foot on the gas, headlights cutting through the rain as sirens wailed behind him. What began as a simple traffic stop was about to explode into one of Brookhaven's most haunting chases, ending with a crash, a vanished driver, and a mystery buried deep in the river. The night of the chase began like any other in the quiet town of Brookhaven, a place where nothing much ever happened. The streets were slick from an evening rain, reflecting the yellow glow of old streetlights that buzzed faintly in the damp air. It was late, past 9, and most of the town was already asleep. Only the low hum of passing cars on the highway and the occasional bark of a distant dog disturbed the stillness. On the corner of Maple and 3rd, a silver sedan sat parked in the shadows beside a closed hardware store. The car's headlights were off, but a faint glow came from inside. The driver seemed to be waiting, unmoving, eyes fixed on the store across the street. For nearly 10 minutes, the car didn't move. A passing patrol cruiser noticed it and slowed down, its officer suspicious of the idle vehicle at such a late hour. The sedan's license plate was partially covered with dirt, barely readable. The officer decided to make a routine stop, turning on his lights and pulling up behind the car, but before he could even step out, the silver sedan roared to life. Its tires squealed against the wet pavement, the sound echoing down the empty street. In an instant, the car shot forward, fishtailing before gaining control and racing down the block. The officer called it in immediately. What should have been a simple check turned into the start of a high-speed pursuit that would grip the entire town. Within minutes, dispatchers were alerting nearby units, tracking the fleeing car's movements as it darted through red lights and cut corners at dangerous speeds. The streets of Brookhaven were narrow, lined with parked cars and trimmed hedges. Every sharp turn risked disaster, but the driver seemed determined, almost reckless, as if he had nothing left to lose. At one point, the car narrowly missed colliding with a delivery van pulling out of an alley. The van's driver slammed on the brakes, honking wildly, but the silver sedan never slowed down. It weaved through intersections, headlights flashing on and off, trying to confuse the officers chasing him. The sound of sirens began to fill the air, bouncing off the small-town buildings, waking residents from their sleep. Curtains were pulled back, lights flickered on, and people peered out of windows to see what was happening. The chase continued toward the outskirts of town, where the streets opened up into long stretches of road surrounded by fields and warehouses. The rain started again, light but steady, coating the asphalt and making it slicker by the minute. The police cars followed closely, maintaining distance, waiting for the right moment to act. They didn't know who they were chasing or why he was running, only that he was willing to risk everything to get away. Inside the fleeing car, the driver's hands gripped the wheel tightly. His knuckles were white, his breathing uneven. The glow from the dashboard lights cast his face in harsh shadows, revealing eyes that darted between the road and the mirror. Behind him, the red and blue lights danced like ghosts in the rain. The engine strained as the speed climbed higher, and the tires hissed on the wet ground. Somewhere deep down, the man knew this night wouldn't end peacefully. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything that had already gone wrong. The man behind the wheel was Ethan Cross, a 32-year-old mechanic who once lived a quiet life in Ridgeport, a city just a few miles from Brookhaven. He wasn't known for trouble. Most people who knew him would have described him as dependable, someone who kept to himself and worked hard. But beneath that calm surface, Ethan's life had been falling apart for months. He had lost his job at a local auto shop after repeated absences and complaints from customers about missing tools. His rent was overdue, and his phone buzzed daily with calls from debt collectors. What had started as a few small mistakes had grown into a spiral he couldn't control. That morning, Ethan had driven around aimlessly, stopping at pawn shops across the city. Security footage later revealed him trying to sell several expensive power tools that investigators later confirmed were stolen from his former workplace. When the pawn shop owner refused to take them, suspecting they weren't his, Ethan left in anger. Witnesses remembered him muttering under his breath as he walked out, his jaw clenched, his hands shaking. That was the last anyone saw of him before nightfall. By the time the sun went down, Ethan had driven to the edge of Brookhaven. He parked near the old industrial area, where warehouses stood empty and most businesses closed after dark. Police would later discover that one of those warehouses had been broken into that same evening. Security cameras showed two figures entering through a side door and leaving minutes later with several heavy duffel bags. One of those figures matched Ethan's build and clothing. The second man was never clearly visible. Ethan had always been good with cars. He could fix almost anything with an engine, but this time he used his skills for something else. Investigators pieced together that the silver sedan he drove during the chase had been stolen from a customer S-lot only 2 days earlier. Its license plate was covered with grime, and the rearview mirror was cracked as if hastily replaced. Inside the car, they later found the faint smell of gasoline and oil, along with an open energy drink can and cigarette ashes scattered across the seat. It was clear he had been on the road for hours before the chase began. What made Ethan run that night wasn't just fear of getting caught. There was something heavier pressing on him, something desperate. Police later learned that he had received several text messages earlier in the day from an unknown number, warning him to stay quiet and get out fast. Those messages were deleted by the time his phone was recovered, but fragments were recovered from his cloud storage. It seemed Ethan hadn't been working alone. When the officer first spotted his car parked in the shadows near the hardware store, Ethan had already made his choice. The moment the flashing lights reflected in his mirror, his instincts took over. He hit the gas before the officer could even step out. It wasn't a reaction born from panic. It was preparation. He had been waiting for this moment, ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. Every turn of that wheel, every roar of the engine, was part of a plan that was unraveling faster than he could control. Somewhere in the passenger seat lay an old, worn-out duffel bag. Inside, it was the reason he couldn't stop, the reason he kept running into the night, even when the entire town seemed to close in behind him. The chase tore through the darkened edges of Brookhaven like a storm. By the time the clock struck 10, every available police unit in the area had joined the pursuit. The silver sedan flashed across intersections and darted between slower cars, its tires slicing through shallow puddles left by the rain. Officers shouted updates through radios, reporting speeds over 100 miles per hour. Despite the slick roads, the driver showed an unnerving control, taking corners that should have sent him spinning. Every move seemed fueled by adrenaline and fear, a desperate mix that made him unpredictable. Ahead of him, the quiet town was turning chaotic. Sirens wailed from every direction, and the glow of police lights painted the wet streets red and blue. Residents peered through blinds and from porches, startled by the noise. Some recorded on their phones, unaware they were capturing the final moments of a man's freedom. The pursuit cut through main roads, back streets, and then toward the industrial district on the edge of town, where the roads turned from smooth asphalt to rough gravel. Ethan's car fishtailed as it hit the unpaved road, throwing up a cloud of dirt and rainwater. The officers followed cautiously, headlights struggling to cut through the haze. They knew they were nearing the end of the line. Up ahead, the gravel road ended at a fenced industrial lot bordered by a dense wall of trees. It was the last stretch before the forest, and beyond that, the river. The officers expected the driver to stop, to surrender with nowhere else to go. Instead, Ethan pressed down harder on the accelerator. The sedan surged forward, engine screaming as it hurtled toward the barrier. In the seconds that followed, time seemed to slow. The car's headlights caught the glint of the chain-link fence, rain droplets sparkling in the beams. Then came the impact, a violent crash of metal against metal. The sound shattered the night, echoing through the fields. The fence bent inward before tearing free from its posts, the car smashing straight through it. Sparks burst into the air as the metal scraped against the hood. The The sedan tore into the darkness beyond, leaving a jagged hole behind. When the first patrol car reached the spot, the air was thick with the smell of burning rubber and gasoline. The fence was mangled, half-torn and swinging loosely in the wind. Officers jumped out with flashlights, following the trail of broken branches and mud-splattered tire marks that led into the forest. They expected to find a wreck. Instead, what they found was eerie silence. The car had crashed only a few hundred feet ahead, its front end buried in the underbrush, steam hissing from the damaged engine. The windshield was shattered, one headlight still flickering weakly, but the driver's seat was empty. Ethan was gone. The driver's door hung open, swinging slightly with each gust of wind. Footprints led away from the wreck, deep and uneven, vanishing into the dark woods. The officers spread out, flashlights sweeping through the rain, calling out to each other as they searched. The forest loomed silent, swallowing every sound except the dripping of water from the leaves. Somewhere out there, Ethan was running, soaked, injured, and determined to disappear. The chase on the road had ended, but another had just begun. One without sirens or engines, one fought between the darkness and the man trying to escape it. The forest behind the industrial lot was thick and uneven, filled with tall trees that blocked most of the moonlight. The rain had turned the ground into soft mud, and every step left a deep print that told a story of panic and exhaustion. Search teams moved through the area with flashlights and dogs, their beams cutting through the mist. For hours they searched, following the fading footprints that led deeper into the woods before vanishing near a stream swollen with rainwater. The dogs barked. The officers called out his name, but the forest gave nothing back. It was as if Ethan Cross had dissolved into the darkness. By morning, the rain had stopped, and the woods fell silent again. Helicopters hovered above, scanning the ground with heat sensors, while drones flew low between the trees. Nothing appeared on their screens except the restless movement of small animals. The only trace they found was a single shoe wedged between two rocks near the water's edge, soaked and torn. Investigators collected it and bagged it as evidence, unsure if it meant he was nearby or long gone. Days passed, and the search widened beyond Brookhaven's limits. Roadblocks were set up on every highway leading out of town. Ethan's photo was released to the public, his face appearing on news broadcasts and social media posts with the headline, "Man Fleeing Police Missing After Crash." Tips came in from all over the county, sightings of a man walking along roadsides, someone matching his description at a gas station, even claims of him hiding in an abandoned cabin. Each lead sent search teams racing across miles of countryside, but none of them turned out to be true. 2 days after the crash, a hiker found something strange about a mile from the search area. It was a small campsite hidden behind a thicket of bushes. The fire pit was still warm, surrounded by burned food wrappers, a half-empty water bottle, and a damp sleeping bag. Among the ashes, investigators found the melted remains of a phone. They sent it to the lab, where technicians were able to recover fragments of deleted files. One of them was a photo showing Ethan standing beside another man in front of the warehouse that had been robbed on the night of the chase. The second man was later identified as Liam Dorsey, a known criminal with a history of car theft and burglary. Liam had been in and out of prison since his teenage years and was known to use different aliases to move between towns. Investigators now believed the warehouse break-in hadn't been random. It was planned, and Ethan was part of it. But what they couldn't yet determine was why Ethan ran alone while his partner vanished without a trace. The discovery of the campsite changed everything. The focus shifted from a missing man to a possible manhunt. Officers began searching for both Ethan and Liam, unsure whether they were still together or had turned on each other. Every path, every trail was checked again, but the forest remained quiet, holding its secrets. At night, residents of Brookhaven claimed to hear strange noises near the river, the crunch of footsteps, the crack of branches, whispers carried by the wind. Some thought Ethan was still alive, hiding just beyond reach, waiting for the search to end. Others believed something far worse had happened in those woods, something the rain had tried to wash away. A full week passed before any sign of Ethan appeared again. The search had slowed, and many began to assume he had escaped, slipping past the roadblocks and vanishing into another town under a new name. But on the seventh day, a fisherman walking along the river glade made a discovery that brought everything back into focus. Caught against a bend in the water was a car bumper, dented and caked in mud. The numbers on the metal were faint, but after cleaning them, investigators confirmed it belonged to the same silver sedan Ethan had driven through the fence. The location was more than 2 miles downstream from the crash site, suggesting he had made it far before meeting his end. Divers were sent into the river the next morning. The water was cold and murky, filled with fallen branches and debris. It took hours before one of them surfaced holding a black backpack soaked through and covered in silt. Inside were several stacks of cash, a set of car keys, and a wallet. The ID inside read Ethan Cross. Near the bag, they found traces of clothing tangled in the roots of a submerged tree. Later that afternoon, a body was discovered lodged beneath the same tangle, face down, wedged tightly by the current. The coroner's team confirmed it was Ethan. The man who had fled through the fence and into the forest had finally been found. The autopsy revealed he had drowned. There were bruises on his arms and legs, consistent with someone struggling against a strong current, but no signs of foul play. It seemed that after abandoning his wrecked car, Ethan had tried to cross the river, most likely under the cover of night. Perhaps he thought he could wade across and disappear into the countryside on the other side. The heavy backpack filled with stolen money might have weighed him down. When the current pulled him under, he wouldn't have had the strength to fight back. While investigators closed one case, another began to open. The recovered cash bore serial numbers that linked it to the warehouse robbery, confirming what they had already suspected. But one question remained. Where was Liam Dorsey? The second man in the recovered photo had vanished completely. For weeks, his name circulated among nearby police departments. Then, nearly a month later, a stolen pickup truck was found abandoned outside a motel in another county. Inside were fingerprints belonging to Liam, along with more stolen cash and a fake ID. He was captured days later at a rest stop, trying to hitch a ride out of state. During questioning, Liam refused to explain what had happened after the crash. The only clear evidence was that the two men had split up in the woods. Whether Ethan tried to run on his own or was left behind didn't matter anymore. His story ended at the bottom of the river. The town of Brookhaven never forgot the night the sirens tore through its quiet streets. The mangled fence near the industrial lot was never repaired. Over time, rust covered the broken links, and weeds grew through the gaps. Locals began to call it the break, a reminder of the man who tried to outrun everything, his crimes, his debts, and his past, but couldn't escape the weight that pulled him down. Even now, when the wind moves through the trees by the river, some say it still carries the echo of spinning tires and the faint hum of an engine fading into the dark.